Let's just make sure the mic is working. Okay, good. Here's what each column. How do you know it's rate? That's what I don't get. I just don't trust this thing, man. All right, we need... What was the pro sup? Does it have wrist in here? Knee, ankle. I think, wouldn't we want to do inverse dynamics? And then we could just do like 3-point. Yeah, that's kind of the unfortunate part, is that basically... Oh, that part is so fucking broken, dude. God. These are the inverse dynamics results, but how do we get back to the old... Okay, let's look at Lyle Rich. See, those are kinematics, but this does not give you... What is this? VTP file? It's a visualization thing, but I think that this... Yeah. But so Lyle... Well, let's go to the paper. Where is the paper? All right, so we're done with the block diagram. I did the block diagram, so can we just do Oh yeah, here we go. There it was. Lie. Oh, red, bruh. $69 and $80.
We study human movement to try to help people engage in their most meaningful life. It may be a child with a neuromuscular disease, an adult with painful joints, or a Stanford athlete who's trying to reach the Olympics.
OpenCap is a tool for doing human movement analysis using just 2 smartphones. We integrated the great advances in computer vision with the advances we've made in computational modeling of the human musculoskeletal system.
On the one hand, it measures the motion. So for instance, what is the angle of your knee when you are running? But it also measures the forces. When you're climbing the stairs, what are the loads in your knee? Going beyond motion and be able to get an estimate of the forces underlying motion is really one of the key innovations of OpenCap.
To make really good quantitative measures of motion, we do that in a lab like where we are now, where we have cameras all over the room, we have force plates embedded in the floor, we put markers on the bodies. It's the same technology that you use to make movies. That's a big barrier. So for many years, it's been a long-sought goal to try to make this more accessible, to really democratize access to the sophisticated analyses that we can do here at Stanford.
OpenCap is freely available for academic research. The code base is open source, so anybody can view it, they can modify it, they can add to it, and that's our hope that people do that. You can use OpenCap through our web application, and all of the back-end computing is hosted here at Stanford.
As a clinician, it gives us an opportunity to measure human movement in such a quick and easy way. We can get the trunk, the shoulder range of motion, elbow, hips, knees, and we're using that to determine if the person is working through a weakness or pain, and then we can suggest interventions to either promote range of motion or protect those joints.
There are already thousands of researchers who are using OpenCap for a variety of applications. People studying osteoarthritis, back pain, spine pain, sports injuries, and also people studying sports performance, sprinting, hamstring injuries. What we're doing is building a tool that elevates the whole
See, what happened? This thing didn't work. What? There we go. I don't know why that didn't work. Okay, neutral. Okay, so I want to take this data maybe and like figure out how, okay, how do we, because yeah, I'm getting frustrated with our data, but I want to know, getting started, okay, yeah. So that's probably part of it. Okay, great. Now we collect the data, best practices and tutorial videos. That's great, but camera calibration, data collection, how do you get the forces? That's what I want to know. Do they show that in here?
Welcome to the Mobilize and Restore Center webinar series. And thanks to those of you that have continued on from the research talk. In this portion of the webinar, our speaker Scott Ulrich and Antoine Felice will provide a tutorial for how to set up a data collection, access kinematic measures, generate dynamic simulations, and understand the strengths and limitations of OpenCap.
Position checkerboard close to where the participant would perform the activity. Further away, checkerboard less accurate the time might be because of slight
Dude,
differences.
this guy's body looks crazy. He must be like 10 feet tall, dude.
Surface, like a plexiglass sheet. Next, make sure the checkerboard is perpendicular to the floor. If it's not, then the floor in the simulation world will not correspond to the real floor, as you can see here. This will really matter in terms of.
Great. Now that we have successfully collected data, I will walk through the different tools that we have available in OpenCap to analyze and process your data, both your kinematics, your joint angles.
That's what I want.
So first, let's get a feel for what the OpenCap ecosystem actually is. So like we mentioned before, OpenCap is powered by OpenSim under the hood. There's a few different ways of interacting with it. We've talked extensively about how to use our web application where you perform data collection, but there's also a dashboard to analyze some simple kinematic measures. So this would be your joint angles. But perhaps you want to take it a step further and analyze something like the muscle tendon unit lengths, which are only dependent upon kinematics. We've provided a Google Colab, which is written in Python. It's a Jupyter notebook, and this can enable you to do slightly deeper kinematic analyses. And this uses a GitHub repository, which we'll refer to several times. It's on our Stanford Nimble account called OpenCap.
Okay, here we go.
So perhaps you want to go a step even further and perform kinetic analyses. You can do this using the same GitHub repository, but this would be performed on your local machine. And finally,
So wait, hold on. Kinetic.
To dig into the details of how we go from the videos to the kinematics.
All right, we'll find out. We'll watch this.
Has all of the code that's currently running in the cloud to power the cloud-based solution. And we'll talk about why you might want to do this in a moment. So we'll start with analyzing data first in the web application, which is the simplest way to do it and the easiest way to start parsing through your results. So say you've collected this nice terminal trial of walking and you'd like to plot a knee angle. You can click on the analysis dashboard button, and it will take you to this session. You can select a particular trial, and then here you can select your x-axis to be time and your y-axis to be your knee angle. Once you click generate plot, the plot will show up, and you can zoom in to see a few gate cycles, and you can scroll over to find particular values.
Man, they picked really clean-ass data, bro.
So I'd like to highlight right now what's something we're going to call the session identifier. This is an important way to identify the particular data collection session. So we recommend writing this down next to other identifiers you might have for a particular session, just so you have a good mapping between who the participant was, what conditions were in the session. This is a long randomly generated string that you'll use to interact with our
yeah, bro, we know what UUIDs are. We're not dumb.
The kinematics were great to visualize on the dashboard, but again, you wanted to look at something else that only depends on kinematics, like a muscle tendon unit length. You can go ahead and use our Google Colab. Depends on kinematics, like a muscle tendon unit length. You can go ahead and use.
Why are they talking so quiet, bro? People need better mics in the world.
But again, you wanted to look at something else that only depends on kinematics, like a muscle tendon unit length. You can go ahead and use our Google Colab. So this is, again, available on our GitHub repository. You can run it hosted by Google, so it doesn't have to run on your machine. Let's walk through how we can use it. So first, you have to install Conda for Colab. It's a package management tool that allows us to install OpenSim. So once you do that, you can clone our repository at the next step. So this clones the repository and installs all the packages that we use for this script. And then you can go ahead and import the particular functions. And here's that session identifier that I mentioned earlier. You drop that in, and you can analyze a specific session. So here, let's look at the same walking trial we looked at before. And then you download the data. And so this is pulling the data down from the database, so the Google Colab can access it. You can see, you can find this data in the OpenCap processing data folder under the session identifier. There's marker data, and there's also the OpenSim kinematic and model data. So now that it's downloaded, we're going to go ahead and compute some specific terms. So we have this class called utils kinematics that has a variety of functions. So you can view the source code directly out of the Colab. We won't go into it, but if you want to know exactly what all the functions within the class do, you can do that. So you can just get the coordinate values. Those are the joint angles. You can get speeds and accelerations. But using the OpenSim API, we can calculate these other things like muscle tendon unit lengths or moment arms. And we can look at the center of mass, values, speeds, and accelerations. So when we click run, we compute all of these things from the kinematics that were previously calculated for this trial. So let's go ahead and plot things. So here, let's just look at the same knee angle plot that we were able to generate on the dashboard. The code here was for several different trials and a few different parameters. So we're just modifying these lists here to look at only the knee angle for the single trial. And you can change the axes labels and titles. Okay, so when you press go, you can go ahead and generate the same kinematic plot that you were able to see in the dashboard. But the real reason you would probably want to use this is to get to the deeper kinematics. So here, let's look at the muscle tendon unit length of the gastrocnemius for only the one trial name that we've downloaded. Here we have the muscle tendon unit length, and you can see it's periodic, like the several gait cycles.
Muscle tendon
Finally, you can
unit
download whatever data
length.
you processed in this collab. For example, we could download the coordinate speeds. It'll put it in your OpenSim data kinematics and output folder. You'll get a CSV of all of the data that you computed in this notebook. Okay, so those are ways to analyze kinematic data in different parts of the musculoskeletal model as it moves through different poses. Let's talk about how and when we might want to go ahead and run the OpenCap core repository locally. So sometimes when you might want to do this, you can run OpenPose with higher accuracy settings. We've optimized the settings that are running in the cloud to be accurate when the person is both quite far away from the camera, so when they're small, which requires a slightly slower and higher accuracy algorithm. We've optimized it for that, as well as the computation speed. But there's an even higher accuracy setting that you can run locally that takes quite a bit more time and requires a high-powered GPU. So times when you might think to do this is if you have the participant is far from the camera and you have kinematic results that don't look great. If you were to reprocess them using the high accuracy settings, you'll get a better, you might get some better kinematics that you see on the right. Another reason to do this is to debug your capture setup, and you can start to understand what failure modes might be. So it can be challenging when you just see the kinematics to understand if synchronization is failing or pose detection. So when you run this locally, the key points are overlaid on the video. So you can go ahead and watch your videos and see if the key points are able to be detected by OpenPose, and this will help you optimize your setup to improve problems that might be happening there, or perhaps it's using the wrong synchronization algorithm. And finally, you can use this open source repository to customize your algorithms. Perhaps you have some activity-specific settings you would like to modify, or you'd like to use a different OpenSim model than we're using in the web-based approach. This would be a great place to do that, and we encourage you to contribute your improvements back to the repository. Okay, so those are different ways that we can look at kinematics, we can reprocess our data from video, and finally, let's look at how we could do a kinetic analysis using the OpenCap processing repository. So we might want to do this if we want to look at the forces generated by the muscles, the joint moments, or the ground.
Yes.
So to do this, I'll describe briefly the dynamic simulation problem formulation that we use to get these dynamics. So we use a modified Rajagopalan model using OpenSim. And we have 40 muscle tendon actuators per.
Torque actuated upper body. What does that mean? Okay. Rajagopal.
Leg, and we have a torque actuated upper body. And we model the contact with the floor using smooth Hunt cross-lead contact spheres. We solve an optimal control problem that's objective is to track the video-based kinematics. So our design variables that we're solving for are the muscle excitations and the torque actuator controls. In our cost function, we're trying to minimize the tracking error between the kinematics that we measured from the video and the simulations kinematics, as well as the squared error, or the square from the video.
Muscle excitations and torque actuator controls. So, all right, there's a lot in this slide.
From the video and the simulations kinematic error between the kinematics that we measured from the video and the simulations kinematics, as well as the squared error or the squared effort terms of all the actuators. And this is subject to some constraints like the skeletal dynamics, the muscle dynamics, as well as a few task-specific constraints. Now, the reason we need some task-specific constraints and occasionally some task-specific objective terms is that people aren't using the same objective for every task. So the human neural control objective is not necessarily the same when you're trying to dunk a basketball versus walk. And so we need to encode this into the optimization. So an example for how we did this in our study is when you're performing a squat, you're not necessarily trying to minimize energy, which is what's showing up in these actuator effort squared term, but you're told to keep your heels on the ground. And so we added a constraint into the problem that you have to perform the squat in a way that your heels remain in contact with the ground. So some tips for the kinetics, and we have much more documentation and more tips on our GitHub repository. But these optimal control problems rely on a number of assumptions, some of which I just mentioned. So there's an infinite number of ways to satisfy the problem constraints. And so the solution is quite sensitive to the cost terms and how you weight those terms. And like I mentioned, it's hard to capture the control strategy into the cost function in a task agnostic way. So that's to say it's really hard to have a single problem formulation for any activity. So it's important to verify your solution, make sure it makes sense, and best case before you perform a large out-of-lab study is to validate it against in-lab measures. Another thing to remember, these are detailed musculoskeletal models. The muscle models are quite complicated. There's 80 muscles, and so these become quite computationally expensive problems. And unlike other optimization techniques, like static optimization, for example, where you solve every step in time one at a time, this is a solution over the entire time interval. So the longer of an interval you attempt to simulate, the bigger the problem gets and the slower it will be to solve. So we recommend splitting your motion into 2-second segments, really focusing on the portion of interest, and maybe having a 0.3-second buffer on either side of that portion of interest. Maybe you really care about 5 seconds of the motion, we would still recommend splitting it up into several different segments. The last thing to remember is these models are, well, they're models. And so all of the outputs here are really estimations. The muscles are generic, the contact models are generic. And so this doesn't change between your subjects, what type of shoes they're wearing, that kind of thing. So it's, again, important to verify your solution. So we validated this approach for 4 different tasks in our paper. And there's no guarantee that it will work the same for other activities or even in totally different conditions for the same activity. So it's very important, like I mentioned, to validate for your particular application. Now, that's the best practice for research, but we have used this formulation across a variety of different activities that aren't in the paper. For example, we have examples for running, and they do work quite well. So we believe it's a quite flexible framework, but it's, again, important to validate what you'd like to study. So how are we solving these optimal control problems? In the paper, we used a tool called OpenSim AD, which is OpenSim with support for automatic differentiation, which makes the gradient computations quite a bit faster.
That's
now,
dope,
the benefit
bro.
here, again, is the speed, but perhaps you'd like to use a different model than the one that we're using in OpenCap. And if you'd like to do that, we recommend that you use OpenSim Moco instead, which is another direct collocation package that is embedded in OpenSim, and it's much more flexible in terms of which model you use, but it does not support automatic differentiation. So in the task that we've looked at, it's solved quite a bit slower. Okay, so let's look at how we might actually go ahead and generate one of these dynamic simulations. So you'll see that I've cloned the OpenCap processing repository to my disk. I'm going to go ahead and open up the example kinetics file, which allows us to run these simulations. So there's a few inputs that you'll have: the session identifier, which we talked about, the trial, that might be a walking trial, and the motion type. So we have settings for
the type options are running, walking, drop, jump, sit to stand, and squats. What if it's not that? If your activity is different, select other. To use generic settings or set your own. For example, okay, so I am gonna run this. Also, why is this guy running the weirdest freaking
setting that has a very general problem formulation? You can see all of the settings under the hood in a file called settings OpenSim AD. You could even create settings for your own activity in this particular file. So other things you need to specify for the simulation would be the time window that you're trying to simulate. And for some activities like sit to stands that are repetitive, we have automatic segmentation of when to start and stop. So you just need to specify which repetition you're interested in. So we'll go ahead and simulate some tasks from the same session that we had before. These are over ground as opposed to treadmill, which just means that the ground is included. So here's the session identifier. And let's go ahead and simulate a sit to stand here. And if you look down in the trial for the details for trials that are sit to stand, we'll use the sit to stand settings, and we'll go ahead and simulate the first repetition of the sit to stand. So you can go ahead and save this. You could run it. Oh, before that, for other activities that don't have the automatic segmentation, you can specify the time window, like you can see for a jump here. So we can save the file, and we could run it right here in Spider, or we could run it in the terminal, which we'll go ahead and do. So you just type Python example kinetics.py. It initializes, and you'll start to see the optimization iterations appear on the screen in a minute here. So this problem takes around 5 minutes to solve. We'll fast forward to the end and show you what you get after a successful simulation. So I found an optimal solution. You can find your objective value at the end of the solution, as well as the contributions of the different cost terms to that final objective. And this took 415 iterations to solve.
Oh boy!
So we can go ahead and look at our data in OpenSim.
I wonder if I can
loading up the model, so we can visualize our results. So we've got our model, and then we'll go ahead and open up our states file, which is going to have the kinematics as well as the muscle activations. So that's in the dynamics folder. There's a bunch of outputs here. So you have the muscle forces, you have the ground reaction forces. Here's the states file. Here are the joint moments, and here are some joint reaction forces. So if we look at just the states, you can see
wait, go back. What?
Ground reaction forces. Here's the states file. Here are the joint moments, and here are some joint reaction forces.
joint moments,
joint reaction forces. So if we look at just the states, you can see the kinematics and the muscles lighting up based on when they're turning on during squat. So there's quite a bit of documentation around generating dynamic simulations generally using OpenSim. And I'd like to just point your attention to those as you get into these simulations. So Carmichael Ong recorded an excellent webinar helping walk you through which different simulation pipeline you might want to use depending on your scientific question. And we highly recommend watching this webinar. Chris Dembia also gave a nice webinar talking about the OpenSim API, which is and accessing it from MATLAB and Python, which is how you can do some of these additional analyses, like looking at moment arms, for example, from the kinematics. And Chris Dembia and Nick Bianco also recorded a great webinar talking about optimal control simulations using OpenSim Moco, which is a tool that I briefly mentioned. So we highly recommend.
Okay, so wait, so should we try this thing? Whoa, you stole Fireship's style. That's crazy, bro. This is clearly a Fireship. Guys, that's interesting. Okay, so we need to do this then. That's core, and then processing. Okay, so we need to clone this. Okay, so OpenCap human movement dynamics from smartphone videos. Okay, so general install Anaconda. What is spider? I've never seen that before. Okay, clone. Okay, wait. Bro, wait, do I really need that? That's the problem, man. This is gonna be a mess. Okay. Dude, whenever you see the first step, bro, is like this install Anaconda thing, you're just like, dude, really, bro? You're gonna make me install Conda? Dude, Conda stinks. Alright. What were the other videos? I wish they would do like a stream of like walking through the whole thing.
Watching this webinar, and we've also provided an
Wait, part 2 of 2.
OpenCap processing repository if you'd like to try it out using some data you collected using OpenCap.
I guess the first part was probably.
So at the end, we'd just like to point you to a few resources. We really recommend checking out opencap.ai. We have getting started information, best practices, troubleshooting, and tutorial videos. So this is really a great place to get going with data collections. If there's things that aren't answered on that website, we'd love to have you ask questions on our forum. So you can go to simtk.org and type in OpenCap in the search bar. You'll find our page and click on the forum. Chances are somebody else may have had your question. They may have asked it, we may have answered it. You can click on it and find your answer very quickly. If they haven't, I'm sure your question will be of use to people in the future. So we encourage you to post it there so we can answer it for everybody else's benefit in the future. And finally, we conduct quarterly office hours through the Mobilize and Restore Center. And if you have questions that are very specific to your research question or your project setup, we'd be happy to do consultation with you and have you sign up for these office hours. So thank you so much for coming to the webinar and for listening. We look forward to questions, but I just want to say a quick thank you to front development
and switch back to questions, as you mentioned. So we have about 8 minutes. If we might go over a little bit, Scott, if that's all right. We're not going to answer them all. We have 84 questions, so there's quite a few to get through. But I think there's some general areas that some of these questions go through, and we can just kind of like maybe get some high-level things on each of them. So I guess just real quick, you did drop out in between the setting up the field of view, and I think you were talking about the optimal angle for different types of trials. So maybe if you can touch on that again. It did break up. I think you were talking about like differences for running versus walking, or like if you're doing a standing squat, how you should have your cameras. And along with that, several of the questions that come up have talked about how many cameras do you need to be accurate, and like how big of a field of view can you have with the definition of cameras that we have in iOS.
Yeah, sure. So regarding the angles, so the thing to keep in mind is try to maximize the spread between the cameras. So we recommend like plus minus 45 degrees angle. It's very good. Shouldn't be too stretchy, otherwise you get a lot of occlusion, and the course estimation model is going to work as well. So plus minus 45 usually works pretty well for stationary activities like squats or club jumps, safety stands. For walking or running, like gait trials, so the participants moving forward, it might want to bring the cameras a little closer to the direction faced by the participants, so maybe plus minus 30 degrees. This will help capture a longer volume, but also this will reduce occlusion that you might have.
Hello, and welcome everyone to our webinar that's offered jointly by the Mobile Life Center and Restore Centers at Stanford University. My name is Matt Petrucci. I'm the scientific program manager of both these centers, and I'm excited to be your moderator today. Today's speakers are Scott Ulrich and Antoine Felice, who will be presenting OpenCAP.
This is the guy, man. Isn't this the guy?
Okay, made it into the lab. Here we are in a
Delp, right?
global pandemic. So I had to wear my mask to get into the building. We've converted the lab, at least part of it, to a little video studio. I can't teach in class, so I want to be able to teach online. So here we go. Welcome to Biomechanics of Movement, the science of sports, robotics, and rehabilitation. For those of you who don't know me, who's probably most of you, my name is Scott Delp. I'm a professor at Stanford in bioengineering, mechanical engineering, and orthopedic surgery. And I'm here to share with you what I know about human movement and how to use this knowledge of biomechanics to enhance the lives of others. Biomechanics has been a positive force throughout my life. When I was a child, I dreamed of competing in the Olympic long jump or even downhill skiing. And I had the intuition that examining films of world-class athletes in the Olympics would help me get the edge I needed. Well, I never made it to the Olympics, not even close, but I did become a high-level nerd and video analyst. I've spent the last 30 years learning as much as I could about biomechanics. I've experienced the joy of teaching and learning from fantastic students in the engineering school and the medical school at Northwestern University and Stanford University. What I'll cover in this series of lectures is derived from this teaching experience. There's a book by the same title and other teaching materials that complement what I'll cover in lecture. The book is named here. It's published by MIT Press. It is co-authored by my friend and co-author, Professor Thomas Yoshida, and the book is illustrated by my friend and brother, David Delp. So let's start by focusing on why we study biomechanics of movement. So why do we study movement? We study because it is absolutely fascinating and fundamental to life. Our bodies are amazingly versatile, exhibiting both strength and dexterity, and movement is vital for maintaining physical and psychological health. Regular physical activity helps prevent heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, obesity, diabetes, depression, anxiety, and other serious illnesses. Yet only about half of the world's population is sufficiently active to maintain their physical and mental health. It's also important to know that physical activity is very potent and inexpensive medicine that can have profound health benefits, even in small doses. In studying biomechanics of movement, we seek to understand the biological structures and processes involved in producing movement and to apply this knowledge to improve mobility. So why do we study movement? Because it's amazing. Check out dancer Victor Luez as the creature in the ballet Frankenstein. When I saw this up in San Francisco, the strength, agility, and grace of ballet struck me as one of the most beautiful and amazing feats that humans achieve. And imagine what's happening in the orchestra as Victor performs. The level of neural control that each instrumentalist in the orchestra needs to simply produce that beautiful sound is absolutely extraordinary. Understanding how the nervous system is conducting the symphony of muscles to produce the dance and the music is one of the great mysteries of life.
Bro, this guy rules. What's his name? Cleo Delp? Bro, this guy rules. Wait, what? Scott Delp. Why did it say Cleo? This guy rules, man. Bro, I feel like not even. Oh, this is so dope, dude. Can we just, do you have to, oh, you have to buy it. I wonder if I can, $80. Hey, whoa. That's an expensive book. Ooh, but that is cool. Homework problems, bro. Oh my goodness. Dude, I kind of want to do this. Oh, this is so freaking cool, bro. Ha. Okay, let's watch one more video. Well, okay. I'm wondering if we should. All right. So you have to. Okay. So here's where I am. This is how I feel about this. First off, doing all this is psychotic, and doing it right is even more psychotic. Then. Okay, well, but they have an example. So presumably we can get some example data. So maybe we do want to try this. Because that is kind of the crux of our paper, is that we have this model, but the model is being driven by okay. I think I'm gonna go inside and then start working on this. It's already 5:30, bro. Ay. Okay, so yeah, we'll end this session here. It's only 40 minutes. All right. Let me just add some of this stuff. Okay, so data. Okay, we. What changed here? Nothing really. Okay. Okay. All right. I'm going inside. It's getting chilly.